Hello and welcome to today's Power of Knowing webinar, Staying Socially Connected, Avoiding Social Isolation. Understanding comes from knowing. Social isolation is experienced by many people, but we do not always have a good understanding of what it is and the negative impact it can have on our lives and the lives of those we care for and about. On the other hand, there are benefits for our brains and our bodies to having social connections. This webinar will explain those benefits, as well as strategies and resources to improve our social connections. This free webinar series, called The Power of Knowing, was created by AuthoriCare Collective, which empowers people to be active participants in their care journey, enabling them to live on their own terms through personalized support for mind, body, and spirit. To get us started, please welcome our moderator, Risa Hanau. Risa serves as clinical and community educator at AuthoriCare Collective and is also a member of the Cone Health Ethics Committee. She is a licensed clinical social worker. Risa, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Paul. It is my pleasure to introduce our panelists for today, Cheryl Greenberg. Cheryl is a life coach for seniors and their families who are in transition, whether they are dealing with physical and cognitive changes, or they are planning new active futures. With Cheryl's guidance and support, clients who are dealing with health issues, including dementias, learn about changes, caregiving, and navigating the feelings that arise with these illnesses. Cheryl's doctorate focused on adult development and memory improvement for older adults. She currently speaks and writes about healthy paths for older adults and volunteers for organizations that support seniors. Welcome, Cheryl.
Hello, Risa. Thank you for having me today.
Certainly. And I also want to welcome our participants. And I want to encourage everyone to make use of the Q&A box and also the chat during our time together. We'll try to answer all the questions that come in as our time allows. And I know, Cheryl, to get us started, you had a question you want to put out there to the participants, and they can make use of the chat to respond.
Absolutely. We're going to be talking about how to stay socially active, what that is for us. But I'd like to just start by asking you to dig into what you already do. Think about a social activity you took part in the last week or 2 or 3, and just name it. Just use 1 to 5 words about what that activity was, and look for an activity you really enjoyed.
All right, so go ahead and type that into the chat and we will, great, dinner with friends, wonderful. I'm doing that tonight myself, and others that come in. So activities, maybe I see going to a book club, another activity. Others that people would like to share? Many of us are just getting started. Walking with my friend, getting outside, game night. Ooh, need to hear more about that. Very nice. So very going to church. Yes, certainly. Our faith communities are very, very important to so many. Thank you for that. Thank you. So there is a range of activities, and I'm sure as we go through our conversation today, we'll dig into more. And what we would like to do now that we've come together is spend about 7 minutes watching a video. And this video is entitled All the Lonely People. It is produced by the Clowder Group. And I think that as you watch it, really let it just wash over you, and you'll see why we show it, and we will have conversation on the other side.
Some researchers are now calling it an epidemic.
It's affecting our health.
Heart disease, diabetes.
Is loneliness. And loneliness isn't just some mildly unpleasant
Researchers say it can be bad for you smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
The isolated and lonely are the invisible in this world.
Loneliness and isolation is one of the reasons why people are exploited financially.
Who is speaking up for them? And who is seeing them? That is an equity issue.
And the 3 years since my wife has been diagnosed with autoimmune disease. I'm her sole caregiver.
There you go. Yeah, I made it.
It's a small backwoods area of the world, and it really hasn't accepted that people can be a little different. There are a lot of pickup trucks that scream, "I'm not going to tolerate you," and so I'm afraid.
LGBTQ people are at greater risk of social isolation and loneliness. And part of it is that many of the LGBTQ older adults have really had to hide their lives.
How does that affect how you make friends and build a support group?
There isn't a support
There isn't a support group, and there aren't really friends.
If someone says, well, you have each other, how can you possibly be lonely? That's not what we are as people. We aren't just one relationship.
I do want to differentiate the difference between loneliness and social isolation, because they're two very different concepts. Social isolation is really the number of people in your network. But loneliness is the difference between what people really hope for and what they have. For some people, solitude is not lonely. Loneliness is what is really associated with very serious health consequences.
Loneliness feels, you keep wishing things that were different than what they are, I wish I lived near the town. If you've got a car, it's not so bad. But if you haven't, it's hell. Sheer hell.
We live in a very rural county. People get isolated very easily. A generation of older women didn't ever learn to drive. He was the driver. So now she's stuck.
Do you ever wish you'd learned to drive?
Well, yes. Years ago, you listened to the husband. The woman didn't have a say in anything.
I spent the best part of 2 years nursing my wife at the end. And when it was all over, I knew hardly anybody. On the day it happens, loneliness starts off really bad. It doesn't matter how many family or close friends you've got around you.
Let's say an older man, his partner dies. That's an important point to intervene, because often women in marriage are the social connector.
I can't see me making a new circle of friends.
I started becoming interested in loneliness and isolation when it was a little topic. I'm a geriatrician. I take care of older adults. When was the last time you actually went out?
2016.
2016 was the last time you were able to...
Maybe 2006, 2000, that was over.
I am humbled by the resilience I see.
I have been in this bed 6 years. Yeah. 6 years.
I don't know how you do it sometimes, Carol.
You know, I think it's the mood that people be in. Some people are moody, you know what I mean? And they just don't want to see nobody sometimes. Me, I'm always open to see people. I speak to them, or laugh and talk with them.
Some of the strongest evidences for that inner piece that we do is work, like our inner part in terms of how we feel about ourselves, how we feel about our relationship in the world. So that is probably part of why she does well. You know, there's no pill equivalent for that.
I have found in our research that if a person has 3 or more people in their life that they could call on in an emergency, that is a number that really seems to make a difference.
I didn't know it at the time, but going to Pride would change our lives. I was able to reconnect with people we had lost contact with.
This has been a long time, isn't it?
It's not too late to find other people that you can have common ground with. What we would have done differently would have been reached out sooner.
It's important to continue to maintain those relationships. And at any point in time in life, it's not too late to build new relationships.
Of course, getting to places like that's awkward.
Yeah,
for
well,
me.
especially where you are. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
If you're trying to help someone else, trying to understand their background, their barriers, but also where their preferences might lie.
I've heard of a group called Men in Sheds.
The main purpose of it is a meeting place for men, which is a workshop, and obviously the people that are on their own and lonely, it's a great place for them to come.
I can begin to see the water above me now. So I would like to have somebody alongside me at home on a more permanent basis. Maybe if I stick at it, that will come in time.
Wow, what a wonderful place for us to begin our conversation. And maybe the place for us to start, Cheryl, we hear so much about that phrase, social isolation, and how do you define it and really put it to the way that we understand it in our lives? What does it look like and feel like?
Teresa, it's an excellent question because there isn't one answer. We all have social needs. As human beings, we all have certain levels of social needs, but it varies from person to person. In the film, one of the people says social isolation is the number of times, it's just a number, the number of times that you see somebody, that you interact with somebody. It's some people are introverts. Once a week, once a month, that's a gracious plenty. Some people, if they are surrounded with people all of the time, but have to spend Saturday by themselves, would feel like they are socially isolated. So what we're looking for is not an absolute number. We're looking for, are people satisfied with the level of social interaction? And when they are not satisfied, that's what we call loneliness. And that's what worries us.
And when we say worry, because it can have not only emotional distress, but also physical implications.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, and I'm going to try to keep using the word loneliness because that's the trigger here. It doesn't feel good. Loneliness is not a positive feeling. However, what we know, and the research clearly shows, is that loneliness has an effect on our health in very concrete ways, and even on our longevity, even on how long we live. So I'll give you some examples. When a person feels lonely, they tend to be at greater risk for physical changes in their lives, in their bodies. We actually send out more of the kinds of hormones that damage cells in the body, cortisol and adrenaline. We feel more stressed. The cells all over our body receive these hormones and they are hurt by it. It kills off or damages some of the cells in the body. What does that look like? Looks like higher blood pressure, higher cholesterol, more other cardiovascular problems, such as more risk for heart attack or stroke. We don't think about that connection often, do we? People who describe themselves as lonely are at higher risk for diabetes, for weakened immune systems, which means they're more vulnerable for contracting and being really damaged by a virus even. Real physical changes. And then the emotional changes, which have a biological component in many cases. So not just feeling sad, but actually being clinically depressed. Or, and this is really interesting to me, because I'm so focused on dementias in a lot of my work, there is actually a higher risk of developing a dementia if a person is lonely. There's a connection between Alzheimer's disease and loneliness. So we're concerned about real physical changes in the body. And the net result of that, you can imagine, is that people who are lonely tend on average to live less long.
So there really is evidence, and we can see it playing out. And I would imagine that particularly during the time of COVID and where we are now, that has really brought this conversation to the forefront. And we've seen probably a lot of what you're describing.
We're actually seeing in retirement communities and assisted living and in nursing care and memory care, during the height of the pandemic, when we didn't have vaccines and visitors were very limited, we really did see significant impact on the health and dementia of people living in these communities. There tended to be a faster decline in the ability to think and remember, for example, for people who had dementia. But we also saw people who were living out in their homes independently who felt very isolated. They were very isolated. They felt lonely. And the interesting thing about this, there are a couple of researchers named John Cacioppo and Stephanie Cacioppo who studied loneliness and the impact on people's health and longevity. And what they said is that people, even these people of all ages who describe themselves as lonely, are at risk for two reasons. One, their behavior changes. If I feel lonely, I'm not as likely to pay attention to those healthy living habits, eating well, staying out of the snacks, getting, exercising, even reading and taking on activities to keep you stimulated. We just don't do it as much if we're feeling sad and unhappy about our lives. So we actually change our behaviors. But the second piece is what I talked about before, that if you're lonely, there are biological changes to your body as well. So it's documented, and it's documented really lifelong. It's not just an issue of older adults.
Right. And it sounds like it sets up this cycle that we get into. And I appreciate that and want to encourage participants through our conversation. We've determined that the chat is not working. So anything you want to communicate with us, use that Q&A. And we will be asking questions from that. So I see this connection you are providing for us, that if I am lonely, then I am not taking care of myself in the way that I may otherwise, in addition to there already being physical impact of loneliness and social isolation. So if we look to that flip side, if we look to the, okay, so what are our options and what are the benefits and where do we go?
Right. So I want to tell you a little story. It's a research story, but I love research. So there's this wonderful researcher. She's a social scientist named Susan Pinker. I think she's a little bit of a character, and I think everybody would enjoy seeing her videos online. She's got YouTube videos. Susan Pinker is, as I say, a social scientist, and what social scientists do is they ask questions and then they do research to find the answers. And what she noticed was that there are 5 groups, 5 communities in the world where people live to be, where more people live to be 100 years old or older. They're called blue zones. And her question was, how come? Why in the world are these people having these extraordinarily long lives? What's different about their lives? So she went to a small village in Sicily, in Sardinia, in Italy, where people were 6 times more likely to live to be 100 than anybody else in Italy. I'm talking data, right? But they were more likely. And she moved in. She tracked their lives over a period of time. She talked to the people. She noticed how they lived. Her favorite person was Giuseppe, a grumpy old man who was more than 100 years old. And she said, well, he's pretty grumpy, so I'm pretty sure being happy and cheerful is not the reason he's living to be older. But she looked at all the factors that we usually think about. We've talked about some of them already: exercise, good eating, moderating alcohol intake, and not smoking, clean air, all those things that we know have a positive impact on health. What she found, though, was the single most important factor, according to her research, was social interaction. That having a community, a very tight community, you heard this in the film, of 3 or 4 people who were your really good friends. The people who, during a snowstorm, if you needed a bottle of milk, they would pull on their galoshes and go to Harris Teeter for you. Those really close friends who listen to you, care about you, and who you listen to and care about. And then beyond that, she talked about a bigger circle of acquaintances. So if you live in a small village in Sardinia, you are likely to know everybody in the village. You can walk down the street and have a quick chat about how things are going. You can play chess and then go home. These aren't the people you spend a lot of time with. But what Susan Pinker and others have found is that social interaction on a regular, sustained, satisfying level, what's good for me level, increases our health and increases our lifespan.
So there's a question that I think is so important. Is somebody asked the question of, how can a woman who lost her husband and lives in a community with mostly couples be accepted in the activities? And so it's that loss that has enhanced or created this sense of loneliness, because all of a sudden I don't belong, or I'm not in the same position as I was. And I think that is a important thing for us to talk about when we think about loneliness and how we do engage and do that productively and in a way that is comforting and nurturing.
Loss is very specific, isn't it? And we saw that actually all through the video. In some cases, in the lesbian couple just described themselves as being isolated over a long period of time. But the woman who couldn't drive, her husband drove. Now he wasn't there, apparently. The man whose wife was a social connector was having problems being isolated, was feeling very lonely. Of course, there's not an answer for how we deal with grief, and certainly not an answer about how we deal with change in our lives. But this is a change process. And it, to my thinking, let's just talk about the grief for a minute, and I will leave that in more experienced hands to talk about in greater detail in another webinar. But grief is a process, isn't it? So as we experience that loss, there is a time period where change happens. We're not going to just have that new life, but what we need to do is, and we'll talk about this, is figure out ways to find those connections. How do I make those connections? Where are they? I don't know about them right now. What do they look like? That's where we need to go for part of our discussion, I think.
Right. So there's the reality that I have been a part of the friend group as couple, and now I am not. And that occurs in many different ways, certainly through death, through divorce, through other ways that we find ourselves in different places in our life. And what was mentioned in the video, and you have mentioned, is that process of finding a new way, or developing that new connection, or becoming a part of the community in a different way. And I think that's very interesting to think about, because I'm me and I do things a certain way, and this is sort of moving us to another place or helping us be guided to some behaviors that could enhance our life, albeit they might be different.
I think the word different is the most important part of this. So what I was trying to say was, we're not rushing a process. We're not going to reconstruct our lives, and we're not going to create new lives when we experience a loss. That's not going to happen right away. There's emotional work we have to do first. But we can talk about, so when an individual is ready, when they have the space and the energy to begin to think about how to deal with the loneliness, the sense of social isolation that is not satisfying to them, how do we reach out? What do we do? How do we reconstruct or create an entirely new life? We can go there and talk about that a little bit if you like.
Yeah.
Like to do that? Let me tell you that everybody, that I have been really focused on this question for a very long time, particularly since the pandemic started, because it was really clear to me, to all of us, that we were going to go through some significant changes that were loss of opportunity, not loss of a partner, but loss of opportunity. We were home. We couldn't see or interact with people in the same ways that we had, at least until the vaccines came along. And maybe for many of us, continuing to be very cautious. So one of the things that was really exciting to me was that once I started to explore this, I found out that there are incredible numbers of opportunities, incredible number of resources for finding those connections. Okay. I'm going to suggest to you that if there are things that you want, if there are new activities you're looking for, you can be a researcher like me. You can go out on the internet and find them, but let me help you get started. If I say something that sounds like something you'd like to try, jot it down. If it triggers something for you, jot it down. Let's just listen to what the choices are, okay? There are so many of them that I put them into 5 categories. It's not everything. Social, educational, teaching, sort of, work, and volunteering. I want to remind you that as you look for new social opportunities, there's sort of an ABC about it for me. ABCs of socializing, I call it sometimes. A is an activity. In order to form this new life, we want to be doing something, right? We're going to get to know people better if we're doing something together, that we have a common interest. We're talking about a book, we're playing tennis, whatever that activity is. And at the same time, that activity is going to be good for our bodies and our brains, right? Number two, or B, is bonding. We want to be sure that while we're doing the activity, we are really connecting to another person. We're not just doing it side by side, and we're certainly not doing it alone in our house. This is an activity with a person. That's our goal, to socialize. And number 3, or C, in the ABCs, is creativity. Rita, your question was so difficult because I don't know how John or Sam or Mary is going to find that new way of socializing. But I know they have to reach into themselves to find what resonates for them. They have to be creative about what the opportunities may be and then go for it. One activity at a time. All of these ideas, well, all these ideas can be modified for different people in different circumstances. Somebody who has all the time in the world in their hands, maybe a caregiver or somebody who's working full time, can modify an activity to fit them. And even people who have a disability or a disease, or can't get out very much, they're choosing to be isolated, whatever that situation is, physically isolated. These are modifiable, or at least they're choices that they can make. You ready?
Yes.
Hold on to your seats because I'm just going to throw some stuff at you, okay? The first thing I said was social activities, just plain social activity. Somebody said they have a dinner party coming up. That's a social activity. That's great. But we can do that regularly with new people or with people who we can establish a group to do something. There's this wonderful group called Romeos. You know what that means, everybody? Retired old men eating out. Now, I think the name puts them down a little bit, but there are Romeos all over the country. Typically, they have a group of people has a meal together once a week on a regular basis. They may not see each other in between. Doesn't matter. That's that casual relationship, not that person who's going for milk at Harris Teeter. That's, we get together, we chat, we know each other, and next week we'll do it again.
And it's scheduled, so we know that it's coming up.
It's every Monday at lunchtime, perhaps.
Right.
Now, there are groups all over the place. Think about where you might find a group. At a senior center, at Parks and Recreation. There is something called Silver Sneakers. Many of you may know about that. For older folks, it's an exercise program, and you can go to the same Silver Sneakers class the same time every week, see the same people. They may not become your besties, but they are people you'll talk to and recognize, and and have a meaningful social interaction for an hour. You can do this online. There are actually a lot of platforms like houseparty.com. You can invite people from their homes to come. They can bring their own snacks. You can see each other online, and there are games on houseparty.com, so you have something to do. Or you can watch a movie, each in your own home, but talk about it by using this platform.
Right.
There are, and I'm not recommending any of these because I'm not an expert in them, but there are dating services, and there are services that just connect you to people of common interest so you can chat with them. You do need to be careful about what you're reaching out for, which is why I'm not going to name any of them. But you can verify that they are safe places to be if that's your preference. All over the country, we have something called meetup.com, which just announces these groups with a common interest are getting together at a particular time. So I've often gone to the meetup.com in a park where there is a known person training dogs. Once a week, take the puppy, meet the people. And there's something called elderlocator.com, which is really good for finding resources for folks who perhaps have a disability or dementia or another kind of a disease. That's just the tip of the iceberg with socializing.
Right, because I think about where does like faith community and where does that fit in? Certainly a central focus for many people, but we also might be distanced from our faith community for different reasons at different times. Is that a place for us to think about re-entering or connecting? Or
in every one of the categories I'm going to talk about virtually, the faith community is one of the options. One of the options. It might be a book group. Right. Every 2 months, you get together and talk to people who you know, and you share some ideas. You exercise your brain. You have yes, but it could also be for volunteering. It can be for, of course, for faith rituals. For many people, the faith community is really the center of making those connections. But you have to make some effort at it, right? Sometimes you have to put yourself forward and say, I would like to not just come here and be alone. You know, we can be alone and lonely in a crowd. Right. But we have to figure out how to meet people, maybe join a committee, join an activity, encourage the community itself to be welcoming, to have greeters and connectors within that community. Sometimes we show up and we still are alone. So it does take our effort to be sure we're connecting. Come back to faith communities a few times probably, but I want to talk about another kind of social group really quickly, and that is support groups. Yeah. I don't think about that as my social, let's go out and have some fun kind of social activity. But for many of us, there are issues or concerns that we have in common with other people. And that's support groups identify a particular concern, connect and invite in people with that same concern. By definition, that's the place that you share information, that you share support, that you really get to know and connect with those folks.
Yeah, I can say at AuthoriCare Collective, we have a tremendous number of bereavement group opportunities. And many, many years ago, I was a bereavement counselor. And after the group ended, a large percentage of the participants decided to continue to meet because they had become connected. Mm-hmm. And I know one of them I ran into a number of weeks ago, and she told me that it's been more than 10 years and there's still a core group of participants from that support group that still get together for lunch on a regular basis.
I can see that because we make very strong emotional connections. If you have a problem and I'm relating to you in that problem, I'm going to feel really connected to you, and vice versa, right? These take place in faith communities, but they also are offered, as you say, as AuthoriCare through organizations that target a particular problem, whose interest is a particular concern. For example, Alzheimer's Association has support groups. Parkinson's Association has support groups. And then there are less focused groups like there's a group called Adult Children of Aging Parents.
Right.
That's not dealing with a particular disease, but it is adults like me who might be taking care of or providing support for my mom. Mm-hmm. So I like that common ground, being able to talk to other people in that care providing situation. There were support groups and just groups in general, just groups that have common interests. I'm going to talk a little faster about some of these other things, but let me talk about education for a minute.
Yeah.
Educate, you know, if there's anything you've always wanted to learn, it's on your bucket list, you can find the time to do that actually because there's so much online, right? And if you don't want to pay for a course or pay a lot for a course, you don't need the credits for a course, there are Emeritus societies at colleges and universities. They're all over the country, are groups called Shepherd Center that provide educational experiences, rec centers, or back to the faith communities, libraries, and so forth, have educational opportunities. Lots online, lots in face-to-face. I have one caveat there, and that is if you take a class, you have to talk to somebody.
Right.
Because if you don't, it's good for your brain to learn something new, but you're not having that social interaction.
Because it's more passive that way. So you're not having that connection. You're not having that social connection.
We're talking about getting your social life more active.
Right.
So going to the library and hearing about Greek literature, fascinating. But if I don't chat up some people and I don't ask some questions and I don't engage maybe with the instructor, him or herself, I haven't made the social connection. I've just made the educational connection. And we're trying to get less isolated.
What if that's not me? You know, what if I'm thinking the woman who asked the question earlier, and it was always her spouse that was the one who would do the chatting up. You know, I'm sitting in a room, I'm interested in this topic. I want to learn how to knit or play pickleball, or how do I bring myself to, I sit at the next to the same person and I turn to them. How do I do that?
What's the first thing you would say to somebody you didn't know?
Probably, hi, I'm Risa.
That's all it takes.
Yeah.
That's all it takes. I think for those of us who tend to be less comfortable making initiating those efforts, number one, go with somebody if you can, right?
Right, because walking in is hard.
Walking in is hard, making that, and if you have a wonderful, gabby, comfortable friend who's going to start the conversation, that's a gift, right? The other piece of it is we have to do some self-talk about this. We have to figure out how important it is to us. Is it worth the discomfort of going to a place, putting that's strange to us, where we don't know anybody yet? Is it worth rehearsing ahead of time what I might say to the person, what questions I might ask, how I want to sit, where I want to sit? Sitting out on the side, my favorite place, is not going to get me engaged in the group. At least sitting physically close. And as you said, say hello to the person next to you, who, if you're lucky, will be gregarious and ask you a question.
Right.
Or ask you where you're from, ask you why you're here. So take little steps. Showing up is the big step. And then plan some little steps.
Right. And I am thinking about the cross-section of community, and we know that finances can be, I'm thinking about things that can be barriers. I'm thinking about transportation, I'm thinking about finances. But you've put out there, I mean, there are a number of opportunities that don't have a cost, or they have a minimal cost. And there are opportunities that we can be socially connected, even if it is virtual. So if I'm a caregiver and I can't physically leave my loved one, or I myself am not physically able, I can still connect. I can still.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Look, one of my very, very favorite organizations for education is Elder Hostel. That's not what it's called anymore. Rhodes Scholars. It is fantastic. You go with a group of people to learn something. You go on a campus and you study Greek literature. You go to Italy and look at the artwork. You spend a week or 2 weeks with the same people. You know you're making friends, but it's very, very costly. On the other hand, I just talked about a book group. Book groups typically, can cost nothing, right? Many of the things that happen in faith communities, all the things that happen at libraries, many of the things at rec centers don't cost anything. Shepherd Center costs about $40 for 6 weeks. So there are a variety of levels of costs, physical costs, real money costs for people. Money should not be the stopping ground here. Well, planning how you're going to get in a group, that's hard for some people. You want to hear a few more?
Yeah.
I think everybody who's listening today has some special skills and knowledge. So besides taking a course or learning something new, how about teaching something? Are you really a great chef? Maybe you build birdhouses, maybe you build houses. Maybe you know Greek literature, or you know everything there is to know about endangered species. How about packaging that and teaching it?
Where would I do that?
Well, you could go to Shepherd Center, and they are always looking for people to make presentations and teach courses. Again, I hate to keep repeating the same thing, but in your community, those same places like the library, the rec centers, the faith communities, they're looking for folks. You don't have to go to a college or a high school or an elementary school to teach.
I remember somebody said to me, I'm hesitant to put myself out there because I'm not an expert. And I remember saying, if you're willing to stand up and share your knowledge, then you're the expert. And that is a way then to bring people to you and to become a part of. And it's also affirming.
Very affirming. We know people who feel good about themselves are healthier too. Absolutely. It gets you in the group. Now, remember before I said, if you're going to take a class, you want to be sure you talk to somebody so that you have the social aspect. Same thing here. I can stand in front of a group, say what I have to say, wave goodbye. But if I stop and I chat with people afterwards, and one or two people come up and they're really engaged, they want to have a longer conversation, I may have found a friend in that group. But at the least I've had a 15-minute discussion, which is a social activity. Somebody wanted to talk to me, that feels good, right? By the way, you can do this online, just like you can have houseparty.com. You can go on Zoom, just like we're doing now. Get a group and get the word out. You're going to be teaching about how to make meringues, and people will come.
Right.
And unlike a webinar, you can see everybody, so you can chat as well.
Right.
Right? Nifty? Some people keep working. Do you know that actually about 40% of people 55 and older are either working or want to be working? And the group of people who, the demographic that is growing the fastest in terms of work, increase in working, more people wanting to work and doing it, 65 and older. So there's mythology that people want to get to 65 and stop, or 67 and stop. That's not true for most people. Why? Well, sure, there are financial reasons for going back to work or for continuing to work, but there are also social reasons. When we give up our work community, we give up one of our social networks. right there. You know, we talk over the water cooler. We talk over Zoom. They're social connections. So many people do that. And I'm going to be mindful of time. So I just want to say one more thing that's connected to that, and then I'll be quieter. The other thing that we do in great, great numbers all through our lives, every age group does it as much. About 25% of every age group volunteers. I think it's an astounding number. I had no idea until I read that. Volunteering, you know, it can be very passive socially. Right this second, I could write all the postcards I want to get out to vote. This is that time of year when you can make a phone call and leave a message, or write a postcard and be a good citizen, a helpful citizen. What we want to do is find volunteer activities that connect us with people again, right? I can't begin to tell you all the different things you can do. You can deliver Meals on Wheels. You can for Meals on Wheels, for example. Which gives you an opportunity to chat with the person you're delivering the food to. There's usually somebody in the car with you. One person's driving. One person's going to the door with the food. Guess what? You've had 2 hours of a social activity. You've made a new connection. If you didn't know that person before, you do at the end of the 2 hours. So there are that, United Way, and I'm back to my faith communities again, and foster grandparents, and teaching people to read who don't have adequate reading skills, teaching English to immigrants, at least to newcomers.
I did that when I was in graduate school.
Thank you.
And we know a lot of our volunteers at AuthoriCare Collective had been served in some way. So there's also that giving back. There's that getting involved and also giving back, which I think, again, that making meaning as a part of that social connection.
Absolutely. I think my first teaching experience was probably working at a camp with children who had intellectual disabilities. And that connection among the staff, because we all had a common goal to help those folks.
Right.
Was very, very important. People will say, and often do say to me, well, I'd like to volunteer, but I don't know where to get started. There are actually matching services. There really are. You can go online, you can find things like volunteer.org. You can go face to face. If you're in Greensboro, there's something called the Volunteer Center. I'm sure other communities have many other communities have similar organizations. There's encore.org. There are governmental agencies that match people, their interests, their time, and what the needs are of the organization. Volunteering can be incredibly fulfilling. As you said, it can help you make connections and be emotionally rewarding as well. And we can do that whether we're 40, 50, or 85.
Right. I'm being mindful of time. And one thing that keeps coming to the front of my brain that I want you to give some thought to for us is, so I see somebody that I care about deeply, and I see that they are lonely, that they are isolated, what can I do? I mean, I can't, physically drag them, but how do we help those that we care for and about maybe take some steps forward?
I think it's gotten a lot easier than it used to be. I remember having those conversations with people 20, 30 years ago, people who were very lonely and really had a lot of need to be productive as well as to make connections with people. And it was hard to find activities because we didn't have the internet searches. I think that this has gotten so much easier. As I said a while back, I began to develop a list 2.5 years ago, and I did it online. Plug in an interest, and up pops a lot of opportunities. That doesn't mean that everybody we're trying to help has those skills. So step one is if we are the care provider or we are the loved one who's noticing that mama or papa or the woman down the street is feeling lonely, the first thing I think I would do is some homework. I would know enough about that person to go find some things that I might be able to suggest. I wouldn't go to a person to say, I'm going to help you fix this problem. I got nothing, but I'll find out. I would go armed. And then I think we have what I typically call a difficult conversation. Because people are not maybe feeling lonely, but they may not know what to do about it, and they may not be open to your solving their problem. So we want to have this kind, open, and what I call empathic conversation. We want to start with something about them. I'm noticing you seem lonely. Is that how it feels? Can I help you with that? I've got some ideas. Can I show them to you? Gently, step by step, I think we can hold people's hands.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And ultimately giving somebody the choice.
Ultimately, we don't fix other people.
Right.
But we do care about other people.
Right. Which I think that your care and your knowledge and your empathy are obvious not only through our conversation today, and I want to thank you for it. I also want to thank you for what you do out there in the community every day, because you've just given us a little window into options and possibilities. So thank you. Thank you for being willing to lead this conversation with me and offer those suggestions and recommendations. I want to also thank the participants. Thank you for being with us and joining with us during this time. Everyone who has participated by registering for the webinar will get an email tomorrow, and that email has resources that Cheryl has mentioned, some links, and so you can look through that email. You can also have a link to the recording, so if you want to go back and look at it, or you want to share it with somebody, you'll be able to do that as well. If you have a question, one question we have is where the game night is. I don't know that I have that answer, but hopefully we'll all be able to find one. But if you do have a question that I can help you with, respond to that email and I will do my best to reply just as soon as I can. In addition to today's webinar, I want to encourage everyone to keep an eye on your email and other social media as we look towards additional Power of Knowing offerings that are going to be coming up in the spring. I'm sorry. Yeah, we are approaching the spring. The fall. I'm getting a little confused. Maybe I've been isolated. In September, October, we'll have our announcements of our topics coming up soon. So please keep your eye out for those. And as we close, I want to share a quote that I think speaks very much to what we have been talking about. And it was said by Vera Nazarian. And it says, sometimes reaching out and taking someone's hand is the beginning of a journey. At other times, it is allowing another to take your hand. And with that, I will say thank you. We look forward to having you join us for future webinars, and I hope that everyone has a good rest of the day. Thank you.